Go ahead, Dad. Drink it. This is the last time I'm pouring wine for you. The words echoed through the quiet dining room and made me freeze, the glass of wine suspended mid-air. I looked straight at Claire, my daughter-in-law, the smile on her lips wider than it needed to be. No one else at the table noticed anything unusual but me. I set the glass down, silently switched glasses with my son Jake, and in that moment, I understood. This dinner wasn't about hearing a will, it was about ending me. I'd really like to know what city you're listening from. Leave a comment below and hit like so this story can reach more people. My name is Philip Holloway. I'm in my 60s now, my hair turning gray faster than I expected, but my mind is still sharp enough to know when something isn't right. That dinner took place on a Tuesday night, in the suburban house where I'd lived for more than 30 years, the house my wife and I built brick by brick, fence by fence, maple tree by the front yard. My wife passed away 4 years ago. Since then, the house has held only the ticking wall clock and the rare dinners when the whole family was together. I was the one who called for that dinner. At least, that's what I thought. My original intention was clear. I wanted to announce a few changes to my will. At my age, after several hospital visits over the past year, I felt it was necessary to put things in order. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I didn't want to leave a mess behind for those still living. Jake, my son, sat across from me. He was 32, his face familiar, but his eyes no longer the same. He used to look at me directly, naturally. That night, he kept avoiding my gaze, adjusting his napkin, taking small sips of water, as if he just wanted the meal to end as quickly as possible. I noticed his hand trembling slightly as he held his knife. Claire sat beside Jake. My daughter-in-law always knew how to appear perfect. A well-fitted dress, blonde hair neatly styled, makeup so subtle that unless you paid attention, you'd think she wasn't wearing any at all. Claire was the one who had arranged everything, the date, the menu, the wine. She had personally chosen an expensive bottle of red I rarely drank, saying it was good for the heart, in moderation. She moved through the dining room as if it had long been her home, pouring wine, placing dishes, smiling at the right moments, resting her hand on my shoulder just long enough to show concern. To an outsider, it would have looked like I was lucky to have such a caring daughter-in-law, but I no longer saw things through the eyes I had 10 years ago. Every time I mentioned the will, even in passing, I saw Claire's smile change. It didn't disappear. It widened, brighter, deeper, as if someone had switched on another light behind her eyes. "Dad doesn't need to worry about paperwork right now," Jake said, his voice a bit stiff. "You're still healthy." Healthy. I almost laughed. For the past 6 months, I'd been living in a body that no longer obeyed me. Sudden exhaustion. Nausea for no clear reason. Mornings when I stood in the kitchen, staring at the open refrigerator, unable to remember what I was about to take out. The doctors called it stress, age, side effects of medication. They admitted, though, that nothing in the test results fully explained it. One thing was very clear. Claire had been around the most during that time. She brought soup when I said I couldn't eat, herbal tea when I complained about insomnia, reminded me to take my vitamins on time. So often that sometimes it felt like if I forgot, she'd be disappointed. "I'm just worried about you, Dad," Claire said that night, placing her hand over mine. "Your family." I looked at that hand. Neatly trimmed nails, smooth skin. A hand that knew exactly how to create a sense of safety. And then she said it. "Go ahead, Dad. Drink it. This is the last time I'm pouring wine for you." No one reacted. Jake was still cutting his steak. I heard the knife against the plate, the ticking clock, my own heartbeat growing louder. The last time. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I didn't show suspicion. I only did what my instinct told me to do. I set my glass down, pretended to cough lightly, and slid my glass a few inches so it was no longer directly in front of me. When Jake stood up to get more bread, he reached for his drink, took a quick sip, then set it down again without thinking. As soon as he sat back, I moved the glasses back to where they had been. It was a small, discreet move, just enough to test whether Claire was watching. Claire said nothing, but her eyes flicked to the glasses for a brief moment, tight and alert, and that was all I needed to see. Dinner went on. Conversation became disjointed. Claire kept smiling, kept asking if I wanted more wine. I shook my head. Jake drank his glass, unaware that he was drinking what I was supposed to have. When they got ready to leave, Claire hugged me longer than usual. She leaned in close and whispered, her voice light as air. "Take care of yourself, Dad. I'll come by soon." The door closed. I stood alone in the living room, staring at the dining table still heavy with the smell of wine and grilled meat. The house was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen looking at the bottle of vitamins Claire had brought, placed neatly on the shelf. I thought about the fatigue, the smile that came at just the right time, the words, "the last time." And a cold thought settled into my mind, so clear I couldn't push it away. Maybe I wasn't sick. Maybe someone was making me sick. It didn't arrive like a storm. It came like a drop of cold water on the back of my neck in the middle of the night, snapping me fully awake, unable to lie to myself anymore. I stood up, slowly walked around the kitchen, turned on the under-cabinet light the way my wife used to when she searched for something late at night. The warm glow fell over glass jars, spice containers, and the vitamin bottle Claire had brought. The label was brand new, the colors bright, the print clear, like a promise. I picked it up, turned it slightly. The cap was tightly sealed, but in my mind I saw her standing right there, saying, "I care about you," hands moving confidently like the owner of the house. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw it away. I put it back exactly where it was, even more carefully than before. If my suspicion was right, then I couldn't let on that I suspected anything. The next morning, I laid all my medical records out on the table. Printouts from the clinic, blood test results, scans, medication lists, doctor's notes. I read them from start to finish like a contract. Years in my line of work had trained me to look for flaws in the smallest lines. All I found were lifeless phrases. No significant abnormalities detected, possibly stress-related, monitor closely, limit alcohol, get more rest. I remembered the young doctor's face when he told me it might just be age, that many people my age went through periods like this. I didn't blame him. I just hated being put into a box labeled "getting old." I took out a small leather notebook I'd used for years to jot things down. On the first page, I wrote the date and then recorded exactly what I remembered. No emotion, just facts. Which days I felt exhausted, which days I was dizzy, which mornings my mind felt foggy. Then I added a section. What happened before? A frightening line emerged. Every time Claire visited, things got worse. Not always immediately, but close enough to make my skin crawl. She always brought something. A paper bag from an organic grocery store, a tightly wrapped container of hot soup, herbal tea, good for the stomach, and the energy-boosting vitamins. Claire never came empty-handed. I stared at the wall clock, recalling the heavy nausea on nights after drinking tea she brewed. The mornings I woke up feeling like I'd swum through mud. The moment I stood in the garage staring at my car, unable to remember where my keys were. If it wasn't illness, then what was it? I took a deep breath and did the hardest thing for someone like me. I changed my routine. I stopped taking everything Claire brought, even the things that looked harmless. I poured the remaining tea down the sink and let the water run for a long time, as if trying to wash away every trace. I put the vitamin bottle in the bottom drawer of the kitchen cabinet. One few people opened, covered it with dish towels so it looked untouched. I cooked for myself, simple food. Eggs, toast, canned soup from the nearby supermarket. I drank plain water, made coffee with my old machine. Nothing fancy. I just wanted my body left alone. 3 days passed, then 4. I was still tired, but not the drained kind. My head felt clearer. I no longer stood in a room forgetting why I was there. By the 5th day, I went out back and trimmed a few branches, something I hadn't thought I had the strength to do before. It wasn't a miracle, just a sign, and for me, a sign was enough. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Claire's name lit up the screen. I let it ring a few times before answering, forcing my voice to sound slow and worn. "Philip, how are you?" Her voice was sweet as honey. "Jake said you didn't take the soup the other day. I'm worried." I looked out at the yard where the late sunlight fell across the maple leaves. I knew I had to play along. "I'm fine, just a bit tired," I said, letting a sigh slip through. "If you're tired, you need to eat properly," Claire replied more quickly. "I prepared exactly what you like. Why would you turn it down?" "I wasn't very hungry." There was a brief silence on the line. Then her tone shifted, no longer soft. "You know, sometimes I feel like you don't appreciate the family's concern," she said, each word carefully placed. "I work all day and still think about you. I research, buy the right things, and you push it away like I'm bothering you." I tightened my grip on the phone. "Don't appreciate" sounded like an accusation. I'd heard that tone before in negotiations when someone tried to pull guilt tight enough to force a concession. I let a pause hang, then spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." I heard Claire exhale like she'd just won a round. Her voice softened immediately. "I just want what's best for you," she said. "Don't make me feel like the bad one. You're Jake's father. I think of you as family." Family. I almost laughed, but swallowed it. "I understand," I said. "I'll come by tomorrow," Claire said, as if the decision were final. "I'll bring some new tea. This one's lighter. You'll feel better." I glanced at my notebook. I knew what I'd just heard. Tea. "Okay," I replied weakly. "Tomorrow is fine." I hung up and sat still for a long moment. The kitchen looked the same. I didn't. I immediately wrote everything down: the call, the words, the tone, the offer. I even noted how it made me feel. Tone changes when refused. Details began forming a pattern. I added one more note, the most important one. I had to make Claire believe I was still an old man she could control. If she thought I was catching on, she'd change tactics. People like her don't stop. They adapt. That night, I prepared as if tomorrow were an important meeting. I tidied the kitchen, placed the kettle where it always was, made everything look normal. I opened the bottom drawer, looked at the vitamin bottle under the towels, then closed it without touching it. I sat down and looked at an old photo on the shelf. My wife and I, standing in front of this house, young, eyes bright, believing family was the safest place in the world. I spoke silently, as if to her. If someone is making me sick, I have to prove it. I have to stay clear-headed enough to protect my son, even if he doesn't understand yet. And right then, a risky decision took shape in my mind, clear as a marked road. If Claire wanted me to drink what she brought, I would let her bring it. I would let her think she was getting closer, but I wouldn't just avoid it. I would watch every second, every movement, every look. I would give her the chance to reveal what she was hiding most carefully. I didn't wait until the next day for Claire to visit, as she suggested. I called Jake that same night, said I didn't want to eat at home anymore, that I needed a change of scenery. I made my voice tired and slow enough that he wouldn't suspect anything. Jake agreed immediately. Claire, on the other hand, sounded openly excited and even suggested a few upscale restaurants. I politely declined and chose an old Italian place downtown, always crowded, noisy, with staff constantly moving. That evening, I arrived nearly 20 minutes before them. I stood at the entrance, looking inside the way I used to before business negotiations. I didn't need a good table. I needed visibility. I chose a table near the walkway to the kitchen, where food smells mixed with the clang of pans, where servers passed non-stop, where no one could do anything quietly for long. Jake and Claire arrived later. Claire wore a black dress, polished like she was attending a formal event. She hugged me, asked how I was, but her eyes scanned the restaurant, assessing the space. I pretended not to notice. We ordered. When it came time for drinks, I told the server I only wanted plain water, no ice. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt Claire shift. She tilted her head, frowned just slightly, then smiled. "Why not have a little wine?" she said. "The wine here is excellent, just one glass." "My medication doesn't mix well with alcohol," I replied calmly. Claire looked at Jake. "See? Your dad worries too much." Jake gave a strained smile and said nothing. She turned back to me, her voice softer but persistent. "Just a little. Have a sip for fun." I shook my head. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to observe. Claire didn't give up. Over the next few minutes, she skillfully brought up the wine again and again, sometimes joking, sometimes sounding concerned. I noticed that every time I refused, her hand tightened slightly around her own glass. When the appetizer arrived, I sighed as if tired of the back and forth. "All right," I said, "just a small glass." Claire couldn't hide her relief. She immediately called the server, clearly stating the type of wine and emphasizing, "For my father-in-law." I sat quietly, watching. In my head, there was no sense of winning or losing, only a cold focus. The server came back fairly quickly. She was young, brown hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, eyes carrying the tired look of someone working a long evening shift. When she set the wineglass down in front of me, her eyes met mine for a split second. It wasn't a polite glance. It was something else. A warning. Urgent. As if she wanted to say something but couldn't. My heart skipped a beat. She turned to place a plate down, and as she cleared an empty dish beside me, her arm brushed lightly against the jacket hanging on the back of my chair. Very lightly, almost unnoticeable if you weren't paying attention. But I clearly felt a small object being slipped into my pocket. I didn't turn around. I didn't look down to check. I kept my posture steady, hands resting on the table, eyes on the wineglass in front of me. Claire was saying something to Jake, sounding more animated than before. She glanced at me, waiting. "I think I should still be careful," I said, sliding the glass slightly away. "Water is enough." Claire's smile froze for a very brief moment. Very brief, but enough for me to see it. She leaned toward me. "You already ordered it. It'd be a waste to leave it." "I'm fine," I replied. "Just leave it." No one said anything else. The meal went on, but I could barely hear their conversation anymore. My ears rang. There was only one thought in my mind. That server had seen something, and she had chosen to help me without even knowing who I was. When the meal ended, I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood up slowly and took my jacket with me. In the narrow hallway leading back, the restaurant noise faded. I closed the bathroom door, leaned against the wall, and took a deep breath. My hand trembled slightly as I reached into my pocket. A small piece of paper, neatly folded. I looked at it in my palm, but didn't open it right away. I knew that from this moment on, everything had shifted into a different phase. I unfolded the paper right there in the bathroom, under the cold white light that made everything look painfully clear. The handwriting was slanted and rushed, as if written while the writer's heart was pounding. "Don't drink anything she gives you. Meet me behind." I read it again to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Part of me wanted to tear it up immediately, as if doing so would make everything disappear. But I didn't. I folded it back up, slipped it into my wallet, pressed deep into the smallest compartment where I usually kept an old photo of my wife. I stood still for a few seconds, listening to water running at the sink outside, to the laughter drifting in from the dining room. The strangest thing was that I wasn't afraid in a panicked way anymore. I was afraid in a clear-headed way. And that clarity told me I had to do everything step by step, exactly right. I stepped out, washed my hands slowly, looked at myself in the mirror. My face was a little pale, but my eyes were sharper than they had been in months. I straightened my collar, took a deep breath, and went back to the table as if nothing had happened. Claire was still talking, cheerfully outlining weekend plans, mentioning how she wanted to rearrange a few things in my house to make it more organized. Jake listened like someone being pulled along, nodding out of habit. The wine glass in front of me was still nearly full. Claire glanced at it once more. I caught the hint of displeasure beneath her sweetness. "I'm tired," I said, placing my napkin down. "I think I'll head home early." "I'll drive you," Claire said immediately, too fast to hide it. "No need," I replied. "I can drive." Jake stood up reflexively. "I'll go with you." I put my hand on my son's shoulder, gentle but firm. "You stay. Go home and rest. You have work tomorrow." Jake opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Claire smiled, but the smile felt like a lock clicking tighter. She hugged me in the parking lot, shorter, as if she didn't want to waste time. "Remember to drink plenty of water," she said softly. "And don't forget the things I sent." I nodded without promising anything. I got into my car, closed the door, waited until they turned away, then started the engine. I drove out of the lot, made a loop through the street in front as if heading home. Only when Jake and Claire's car disappeared did I turn into the narrow alley behind the restaurant. Behind the restaurant was a tight, empty space, dark brick walls, trash bins lined up, the smell of frying oil mixed with dish soap in the cold air. Yellow light spilled from the back door onto damp concrete. I parked a little distance away, stepped out, pulled my collar closer. A young woman stood near the back door, holding an unlit cigarette. She turned when she heard my footsteps. Her eyes searched my face, as if making sure I was the right person. "Are you Mr. Holloway?" she asked quietly. I froze. How did she know my last name? I didn't remember telling anyone at the restaurant. "You're the one who gave me the note?" I asked instead of answering. She nodded, swallowing hard, trying to stay calm. "I'm sorry if I scared you. I didn't know what else to do." "What's your name?" I asked. "Lena," she said. "Lena Brooks." It sounded very American, very ordinary, which only made me more uneasy. I looked around to make sure no one else was nearby, just the hum of an air conditioning unit and distant traffic. "Why did you do it?" I asked. Lena lowered her eyes for a moment, then looked straight at me. "Because I know her." A simple sentence, but it seemed to drag the air down with it. "Claire?" I asked, even though I already knew. Lena nodded. "She's a distant relative of mine. Not close. I haven't spoken to her in years, but I recognized her the moment she walked in. I recognized the way she smiles." I felt a chill run down my spine. The way she smiles? Lena clenched the cigarette in her hand as if she wanted to snap it in two. "It's not a happy smile. It's the smile of someone who's already calculated everything." I didn't speak. I just watched her, waiting. Lena took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Sir, don't drink anything she gives you. Not wine, not tea, not vitamins. Anything." "I need a reason," I said, keeping my voice steady. Lena looked down at the concrete, then spoke quickly, as if afraid she'd change her mind if she slowed down. "She's done this before." My heart thumped hard. "A man," Lena said. "Her ex-husband. He died suddenly." My throat went dry. "What did they say he died from?" "They said it was a stroke," Lena replied, her eyes reddening. "He had symptoms for a while before that. Fatigue, nausea, confusion. Then, one night, it was over." I stood there, rooted to the spot. The words matched my life over the past 6 months too perfectly. That unexplained exhaustion, that foggy mind. "Are you sure?" I asked, though the question sounded weak. Lena let out a dry laugh with no humor in it. "I didn't have proof to go to the police back then. My family didn't want trouble. But I know Claire. I know how good she is at playing the victim. She cries well, and she knows how to choose her targets." I swallowed, my voice rough. "Why are you working here?" Lena shook her head. "I've worked here for 2 years. I had no idea she'd show up tonight. When I saw you with her, She hesitated, then said slowly, each word heavy. I saw the same scene playing out again. I looked at her. She was young, but her eyes carried the weariness of someone who had seen too much. Then Lena said the sentence that made everything inside me collapse. "You're not the first." I heard it like a door slamming shut behind me. There was no turning back now. No room left to reassure myself that I was imagining things. No excuse to believe Claire was just overly caring. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Lena shook her head, her voice dropping. "Nothing. I just don't want her to do this again. If I stay silent, I won't be able to sleep." I looked up at the night sky where streetlights washed out the stars. I thought about Jake, about my son living with this woman, about the dinner at home, about the words, "the last time." I looked back at Lena. "Can you tell me everything you know?" She nodded, lips pressed tight as if holding back tears. "I will. But you have to promise me one thing." "What is it?" "Don't let her know I talked to you," Lena said urgently. "She never forgives anyone who ruins her plans." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded slowly, because deep down I understood better than anyone. From this moment on, this was no longer suspicion. This was a fight to stay alive. I walked Lena toward the far end of the parking lot, where the streetlight didn't shine directly on our faces. She spoke in a low, broken voice, like someone afraid that saying it out loud would make it too real. I didn't ask too many questions right then. I just memorized every fragment, every detail, and promised to contact her again in a safe way. Before we parted, Lena pressed a slightly worn business card into my hand, the corners soft from being handled too often. "A friend of mine," she said. "She's a nurse. She knows how to test things without making noise." I looked at the name on the card under the yellow light. Not a fancy clinic, just a name and a phone number. But it felt like the first real key. I drove home with both hands firmly on the steering wheel, so focused I didn't turn on the radio. The roads were empty that night, cold wind moving through the trees lining the street, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. Not toward the ending Claire had planned, but toward the truth. As soon as I got home, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and turned on the kitchen light. I opened the bottom drawer and took out the vitamin bottle. I pulled out the herbal tea box, the unopened packets, and a few other things Claire had kindly brought over, like lozenges and an energy drink. I lined them all up on the table like evidence. Even without test results, just seeing them there made my skin crawl. The most harmless-looking things are sometimes the most dangerous. I called the number on the card the next morning, just as the sun was coming up, keeping my voice as normal as possible. On the other end was a middle-aged woman, her tone brisk but not cold. She asked me a few short questions, then said something that told me I was talking to someone who knew what she was doing. If you suspect drinks or food have been tampered with, preserve the items exactly as they are and don't handle them more than necessary. The safest way is to document everything and arrange testing through the proper channels, ideally with law enforcement guidance, so the chain of evidence stays intact. We arranged to meet at a small medical building about a 20-minute drive from my house, a place with a clinic that worked on a flexible schedule. When I called the number again to confirm, the woman introduced herself plainly. Nora Jensen. I arrived early, wearing a baseball cap and glasses out of habit, like someone who didn't want to be recognized when dealing with things that shouldn't be seen. Nora opened the door for me with a key card. She had brown hair pulled neatly back, sharp eyes but not judgmental. She looked at me, then at the paper bag I was carrying. "You're Philip," she said. I nodded. "I don't want to make a fuss." "If you want to stay alive, you have to be discreet," she replied, blunt enough to snap me fully awake. "Put everything on the table." I laid it all out. Nora put on gloves and examined each item carefully, like someone used to spotting what didn't belong. She didn't make promises. She only said she would do her best to find the clearest answers she could, then asked about my symptoms, how often they occurred, and when they started. I told her briefly, straight to the point. Each time I mentioned that the symptoms tended to get worse after Claire visited, I saw Nora's expression change. Not surprise. Confirmation. As if she'd heard something like this before. Nora took a few samples into the back room. I waited in a small space that smelled of disinfectant, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, my hands resting on my knees to keep them from shaking. I couldn't remember the last time I'd waited this tensely, not even when signing major contracts. Contracts could cost money. This was about my life. About half an hour later, Nora came back. She was holding a stack of printed pages and a small vial with a sample inside. She set them down on the table and looked straight at me. "Are you taking any heart medication?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, my doctor has never prescribed any." Nora nodded slightly, as if that were the final piece. "There are traces of a prescription substance in your vitamins," Nora said, keeping her words careful. "Not an amount that causes an immediate collapse, but enough to steadily weaken a person over time." She looked at me to make sure I understood. "It can cause exhaustion, nausea, mental fog, and dangerous changes in the body's rhythm. What matters is this. It doesn't belong in anything you were given, and taken repeatedly, it can become life-threatening." I stared at the vitamin bottle on the table like it was a foreign object. It had sat in my kitchen, right next to the sugar jar and the tea box. I had taken it, believing I was taking care of myself. I asked the question I had been afraid to ask for a long time. If I had kept taking it, what would have happened to me? Nora didn't answer dramatically. She just exhaled. "You were already showing signs. If you hadn't stopped, it's very likely that one day someone would have found you at home and called it natural." I closed my eyes for a second. In my mind, I saw the dining room, Claire's smile, the words, "the last time." Then another feeling surfaced, cold but unmistakably clear. I had been right. I opened my eyes, looked at Nora, and found myself smiling. Not a happy smile. The smile of someone who had finally found the way out of the fog. I wasn't lost anymore. And in the game Claire thought she was controlling, I had just won the most important round. Nora watched me, as if making sure I was all right. "You need to get official blood tests," she said, "but in a controlled way, and you must absolutely avoid anything from her." "I understand," I replied. Before I left, Nora handed me a short set of written instructions. No hospital letterhead, just steps to follow and how to preserve samples if needed. She also added one sentence, simple but heavy as stone. Don't confront her directly if you don't have an exit plan. I went home and put everything Claire had given me into a plastic container with a lid, sealed it tightly, and placed it on a high shelf in the garage where no one ever looked. I cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, got rid of anything that could make me careless. I also changed the lock on the back door. Not because I wanted to turn my house into a fortress, but because I was starting to see things for what they really were. This was no longer a family issue. This was about survival. From that day on, I stopped all private meetings with Claire. If she called, I answered politely, said I was resting, had an old friend visiting, or was out. I didn't let her into the house. I didn't drink or eat anything unless I personally opened it myself. Claire showed irritation, but kept her sweet tone. She switched tactics as easily as someone changing masks. One day she was worried, the next she was sulking. Then she complained about how exhausted she was from having to carry everything. I listened, nodded, apologized just enough to keep her from exploding, but I never gave in on what mattered. The hardest part was Jake. I wanted to tell my son immediately, to grab his shoulders and shout that his wife was not who he thought she was. But I remembered Nora's words, and I remembered the confusion in Jake's eyes every time Claire spoke. My son was trapped in a web. If I pulled too hard, he could be dragged down with it or used as a shield. I needed proof solid enough that when I finally spoke, Jake wouldn't be able to convince himself I was imagining things. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, Graham Whitaker, who had handled my paperwork for more than 10 years. I didn't mention the medication directly. I simply said I wanted to temporarily update my will because family circumstances had changed and that I needed it done quickly and quietly. Graham didn't ask many questions over the phone. He just said, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. My office." I hung up and sat alone in the living room, listening to the wind outside the window. I looked at my wife's photo, then at my phone. I knew I was stepping into a different kind of game now, one where the winner was the one who could wait longer. I took out my leather notebook and wrote one more line. Start the trap. Not a loud, vengeful trap. A trap that would make Claire reveal herself. A trap that would make her think I was growing weaker while I was becoming clearer every day. A trap that, when she reached out her hand, wouldn't be seen by me alone, but by the law as well. And when I set the pen down, one thing became absolutely clear to me. I was not going to die a natural death the way Claire wanted. I was going to live long enough to end her plan. After my meeting with Graham, I didn't go straight home. I drove around a few familiar streets, then stopped at a small cafe near the park where my wife used to like reading the newspaper on weekends. I sat in the car for a few extra minutes just to make sure no one was following me. An old habit from years of dealing with things you couldn't see with the naked eye. My phone buzzed as I stepped into the cafe. Claire's name lit up the screen. I looked at it like a fish biting the hook, then answered. "Dad?" Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Are you at home? I've called a few times." "I stepped out for a bit," I replied, forcing my voice to sound weak and slow, like someone short of breath. "Out?" Claire asked, dragging out the last word. "Are you sure you should be out? You haven't been well lately. Jake's very worried." I heard Jake's name used like a shield. I exhaled, letting a sigh slip through. "I'm fine. I just needed some air." Claire paused for a beat. Then she softened her tone as if switching channels. "Let me come by with you. I can cook something for you. I'll arrange my schedule. I can come more often, even a little every day." Every day. I pictured tea packets, supplements, appearing regularly in my kitchen. I kept my voice steady. "No need," I said. "I can take care of myself." "Philip," she said, using my name directly, no Dad this time. Just once, but enough for me to hear the impatience. "You're being stubborn." I stayed silent, then replied quietly, "I don't want to be a burden." "A burden?" Claire let out a small laugh. "I'm family. Don't talk like a stranger." Family. I could almost see her smile in the darkness. I changed the subject, talked vaguely about the weather, about not sleeping well lately. I scattered just enough tired remarks for her to think she was on the right track, and she bit immediately. "Not sleeping well is a bad sign," Claire said. "I've read a lot. Older people who start losing sleep, then get forgetful, then stay tired for a long time. It usually means the body is signaling something." "Signaling what?" I asked, playing dumb. Claire lowered her voice as if sharing something serious. "You don't have much time left." The words dropped into the noisy cafe like a block of ice. I clenched the phone, my nails pressing into my palm. Claire had just said something no normal daughter-in-law should ever say. Not out of concern, but out of certainty. I let a few seconds pass, then spoke in a shaky voice I'd practiced. What are you saying?" "I'm just telling the truth," Claire replied, faster now, as if trying to recover. "I don't want you to lie to yourself. If something happens, you need to be prepared. Jake needs to be prepared too." She brought Jake into it like a reminder that I shouldn't resist. I swallowed, making my voice even weaker. "Yeah," I said. "I've been thinking about that too." "Then the will?" Claire asked very lightly, as if by accident. "Have you done it yet? I'm just worried that if you wait too long, you might forget what you want." I looked at the coffee cup in my hand, steam rising softly. I answered vaguely, exactly as planned. "I talked to my lawyer," I said. "Nothing's been signed yet. I'm still considering." "Considering," Claire repeated, and I clearly heard the displeasure. "Are you planning to change something?" "Just a few things," I said deliberately, keeping it unclear. "I want everything settled, so no one has to worry." "I think Jake should know," Claire said, her tone gentle but firm. "The will affects the family." "Jake's still young," I replied. "I don't want to put pressure on him." Claire went quiet. In that silence, I imagined her calculating, just like Lena had said. Then she returned with the same sweet voice as before. "Then let me come by tonight," she said. "Just for a little while. I'll bring some soup. You don't need to eat much, just enough to keep your strength." I looked out the cafe window at people passing by with shopping bags, ordinary lives unfolding. I knew this was the next move in the game. I let my voice tremble as if unsure. "Tonight? That's fine," I said, "but I'm tired. I might go to bed early." "I understand," Claire replied quickly. "I'll come early, around 7 p.m. When I hung up, I didn't take a single sip of coffee. I set the cup down, feeling like I'd just signed something dangerous with my own voice. I sat in the car and called Lena using the other number we'd agreed on, the one we only used if it was urgent. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "She's getting impatient," I said. Lena was silent for a second, then her voice tightened. "You have to be careful. When Claire gets impatient, she'll take risks." "I need to contact the police," I said, "but not through official channels. Jake would find out, and Claire would sense it." Lena exhaled. "I know someone. A police officer I know. Not a close friend, but someone I trust. I'll text you the location." We agreed to meet in a parking lot next to a large grocery store, a place with constant foot traffic. I arrived near dusk. Lena stood beside an old sedan. Next to her was a man in his 40s wearing a dark jacket, so ordinary he could blend into any crowd. He introduced himself as Officer Grant, spoke briefly, without small talk. "I've heard the basics," Grant said. "But you understand, to intervene officially, we need direct evidence. Testimony and suspicion aren't enough." I have test results, I said. Low-dose heart medication mixed into vitamins. Grant frowned as he looked over the papers I handed him. He read quickly, then looked up. This is very significant, but we still need to link it to her. We need to prove she gave it to you, and that you didn't do it yourself. I know, I replied. So what do you need? Grant met my eyes. A clear situation. One time she brings something. One time she pushes you to take it. If there's audio, video, or if we're close enough to step in and seize it, then it's different. Hearing the words, "we're close enough," made my chest feel heavy. It meant I had to give Claire one more chance to step forward. One more step could be very dangerous if I made a mistake. Grant seemed to read my thoughts. We're not asking you to do anything reckless, but if you want this stopped the right way, you have to cooperate, and you have to follow the process. I looked at Lena. She nodded slightly, eyes worried but firm. She's coming to my house tonight, I told Grant. 7 p.m. Grant didn't look surprised. He just nodded. All right, we'll prepare quietly. Can you wear a recording device? I thought of Claire's words. You don't have much time left, echoing in my ears. I thought of her smile. Then I nodded. I can, I said, but I want one thing. I don't want Jake pulled into this yet. Grant answered immediately. We'll keep it as contained as possible until we have grounds to act. I left the parking lot and drove home under a pale sunset. Everything around me was still peaceful America. Traffic lights, passing cars, houses with neatly trimmed lawns. But inside me, the rules of the game had changed. From now on, one small mistake could cost me my life. And Claire was on her way, carrying that sweet smile of hers, like she was carrying an ending already written. I got home just as dusk settled in. I didn't turn on many lights, only enough to see my way through the living room and kitchen. The house suddenly felt larger than usual, so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. I set my phone on the table and looked around like someone inspecting a work site before pouring concrete. Front door, back door, side windows, locks, curtains drawn tight. I did everything slowly, neatly, without any trace of panic. Officer Grant had told me his team would be nearby, but I wouldn't see them. All I had to do was play the role of a man truly growing weaker, and most importantly, let Claire say the things she thought only I would ever hear. I stood in the kitchen, poured a glass of filtered water, and set it on the table out of habit. Inside me was a strange, hollow space, holding both fear and clarity. I thought about Jake. I thought about the way he avoided my eyes at dinner. He wasn't a bad man. He was just being led little by little. I sat down, picked up my phone. This call was the first step of the trap, and it had to feel real. I dialed Claire. She answered almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. Dad, I'm on my way. How are you? I inhaled, let my voice tremble. Claire, it's me, I said, forcing the sound of labored breathing. I'm not okay. I'm scared. Oh my God, Claire exclaimed, her voice rising. What's wrong? Chest pain? Dizziness? I told you not to go out. I swallowed, let a few seconds of silence pass like I was struggling. My heart feels irregular. I'm afraid I'm going to die alone in this house. I heard her breathing on the other end. Not worry, more like someone who had just been handed the right key. Don't panic, Claire said, gentle but urgent. I'm coming right now. Don't call anyone else, okay? Jake's already stressed. If you call emergency services, everything will get messy. I'll be there. That's enough. I know what you need. You know? I asked, clinging to her words. I've been taking care of you this whole time, Claire replied, and there was a slick confidence in her voice. I have something stronger. You have to trust me. I closed my eyes for a second. Something stronger. That was exactly what Grant needed to hear. I let my voice weaken completely. "Hurry, Claire, I don't want to die." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Claire said immediately. "Sit still, don't eat anything, don't drink anything, just wait for me." After I hung up, I set the phone down, my hands still slightly shaking. Not from acting, but from what that sentence meant. Don't drink anything, just wait for me. She didn't want anything interfering with her plan. I walked into the living room and sat in the armchair by the window, where my wife used to sit watching the evening news. I looked out into the deepening darkness of the yard. The low bushes were still. The porch light cast a warm glow. There was no sign of the police, but I knew they were there. I had to believe that, the same way I had to believe I was no longer lost in confusion. A car pulled up in front of the house exactly when Claire had promised. 23 minutes. She was always punctual when it mattered. I heard the knock, light but firm, not the knock of a casual visit. Oh, I stood slowly and opened the door. Claire stood there with a small leather bag, hair neatly styled, her face tense in the practiced way of professional concern. "Oh, Dad," she said, reaching out to touch my shoulder as if checking me. "You look so pale. Sit down right away." I let my legs wobble just enough. I'm dizzy." Claire helped me into the living room and lowered me into the chair like I was something fragile. Her eyes swept quickly around the house, over the kitchen, the hallway, the stairs, like someone making sure we were alone. "Where's Jake?" she asked casually. "I told him to rest," I replied, faking shallow breaths. I didn't want to worry him." Claire nodded, and I clearly saw a flash of satisfaction before it vanished. She opened her bag, unzipped it very slowly, like performing a ritual. Then she took out a small bottle, dark glass, unlabeled, with a brand new screw cap. "Here," Claire said, setting the bottle on the coffee table in front of me. "Something stronger. You drink this, you'll be fine." I looked at the bottle. In my mind flashed the image of the vitamin jar, the papers Nora had given me, the word natural they would have used to seal my life shut. I reached out, making my hand tremble. What is this?" I asked weakly. Claire smiled lightly and leaned closer, as if turning her voice into a lullaby. "Don't ask. You're tired. Just trust me. Drink it all. You'll be completely better." The words landed clearly, sharper than any blade. I heard them not just with my ears, but with all the months I had lived in a fog. I picked up the bottle. My palm was slick with sweat. I twisted the cap slowly, like someone afraid of himself. Claire stared, her eyes bright with anticipation. She placed her hand on my knee, squeezing gently, urging me on. "Hurry," she whispered. "Drink it all. I'm here." I raised the bottle close to my mouth. I had no intention of drinking. I only needed this moment to last long enough for everything to be recorded. "Claire," I said, my voice catching, If I don't make it, you'll take care of Jake, won't you?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course." Then she continued, faster, more naturally, like she was already seeing the future neatly in her hands. "Don't worry about that. You just need to drink." At that exact moment, I said the agreed phrase clearly, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "I'm going to drink it now." That was the signal. Within seconds, officers entered from the front, fast and controlled, voices sharp and unmistakable. "Police! Don't move!" Claire spun around, her face draining of color as if the room had tilted beneath her. Her bag fell to the floor. She staggered back a step, mouth opening but no words coming out. I let go instinctively, and the bottle slipped from my hand, smashing onto the hardwood floor. A sharp crack, dark liquid spread across the floor, a faint acrid smell rising. Officer Grant rushed in first, two others right behind him. One of them immediately pulled me away, standing in front of me like a shield. "Claire Dawson," Grant said coldly. "You're under arrest for attempted poisoning and conspiracy to cause harm." "No!" Claire screamed, and in that scream, all sweetness vanished. "What are you doing? I was saving him. Philip, tell them. Tell them I was helping you." I looked at her and no longer saw my daughter-in-law. I saw someone being stripped of her mask in the very room where my family once sat down to dinner. Grant twisted her arms behind her back, the handcuffs snapping shut with a cold click. Claire struggled, eyes blazing, then suddenly turned her head toward me. The smile was gone now, replaced by raw hatred. "You think you won?" she hissed. "Jake will hate you. You've destroyed his life." I didn't answer right away. I took a breath, feeling my chest lighter even though my heart was still pounding. "Maybe," I said, hoarse but clear, "but he'll still have a life to hate me with, and that's what you weren't planning to give us." As they led Claire out the door, I looked at the pool of liquid on the floor, the shattered glass reflecting the light. I knew the trap had closed, but in that same moment, I understood something heavier. I still had to face Jake, and the real battle inside my family was only just beginning. When the sound of the police cars faded down the street, the house fell silent again. Only the sharp smell from the spill remained, and the heavy thudding of my heart. I sat back down in the armchair, hands resting on my knees, forcing my breathing to steady. Officer Grant stood by the door and briefly explained that they had secured the scene, would take the samples for testing, and would be in touch soon. I just nodded. I knew the hardest part wasn't the shattered bottle. It was the call I still had to make. I dialed Jake as soon as Grant left. My son answered after a few rings, his voice tight as a drawn wire. "Dad? Claire said she went over. What's going on?" "Come here," I said. "Right now. Alone." You're scaring me," Jake replied, then added quickly, "Where's Claire?" I swallowed. "Just come. I'll tell you everything." Less than an hour later, Jake burst into the house, hair disheveled, eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked around, saw the stain on the floor and bits of glass still left. "What is this? What did you do?" I pointed to the chair across from me. "Sit down." Jake didn't sit. He stood there, fists clenched. "Where is Claire?" "She's been arrested," I said slowly, letting each word land. "The police arrested her tonight." It was like he'd been slapped. "What are you talking about?" I laid out Nora's papers, the summarized test results, and the case number Grant had given me. I placed everything on the table, without pushing, without forcing, just letting him see. Jake scanned the pages, then let out a harsh laugh. "What does this prove? Dad, you're obsessed." He slammed his hand on the papers. "You've destroyed my marriage." I stayed calm. The vitamins, the tea, everything Claire brought had traces of low-dose heart medication. I stopped taking them and got better. Tonight she brought an unlabeled bottle and told me to drink it all. The police came in. Jake shook his head over and over. "Impossible. Claire loves me. She took care of you this whole time." He slammed his hand on the table again. "You ruined my life." I didn't argue. I let his anger wash over me like a hot wind. If I fought back, Jake would cling to emotion to escape the truth. After a while, his voice dropped, drained. Why? Why would she do this? I told him what he had never known. "My old will left almost everything to you. Claire wanted me to die a natural death." Jake froze. His shoulders sagged like the weight of the room had settled on his back. He collapsed into the chair, covering his face with his hands. I heard his breathing hitch, then break. "No," he whispered. "That can't be true." My phone buzzed. Grant reported briefly that they were reviewing Claire's background, coordinating federally and with other departments. There were signs of multiple prior marriages, several suspicious deaths, and cases being reopened. I ended the call and looked at Jake. "You heard that. This isn't just about our family." Jake looked up, eyes wild, then slowly empty. He didn't argue anymore. He just stared into space, replaying every kind gesture, every harmless-sounding word. After a long time, he spoke, his voice rough. "Dad, if you hadn't done this, would you really be dead?" I nodded. "Yes." Jake bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. I didn't touch him right away. I just sat there across from him, giving my son a place to fall apart without shame. 8 months later, I walked into the courthouse feeling like I was entering a building I had passed my whole life but never truly stepped into. I wore an old suit, the tie my wife had bought me for an anniversary. Jake walked beside me, much thinner now, eyes hollow. He didn't speak on the way. His silence weighed heavier than any accusation. Inside the courtroom, the white lights made everything look harsh. Claire sat at the defendant's table, hair neatly styled, her face unbelievably calm. When I entered, she looked up. Our eyes met, and her lips curved into a thin, blade-like smile. No pretense of care, no sweet tone left. Just a reminder that she still wanted to hurt me, even in handcuffs. I sat in the witness section, hands on my knees to keep them from shaking. I had lived through months of confusion, thinking I was about to die. I had walked out of the fog. I wouldn't let a smile break me now. When it was my turn, I stepped to the stand and took the oath. The prosecutor's first questions were simple: who I was, my age, how I met Claire. I answered briefly, then they guided me straight into what I didn't want to remember but had to tell. I spoke about the symptoms creeping in, about Claire bringing tea, vitamins, soup, like a model daughter-in-law. I described how I felt worse after each visit. I talked about the test results, about the low-dose heart medication found in the vitamins. I told them about the night of the trap, the unlabeled bottle, the words, "Drink it all. This time, you'll be better." At times, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clerk's pen scratching paper. The defense attorney tried to redirect, suggesting I might have taken other medications on my own, that I could be confused because of my age, that I disliked my daughter-in-law and made it all up. I looked straight at them and said one sentence, slowly enough for everyone to hear. If I were making this up, I wouldn't have had to play the role of a dying man in my own home just to survive. After me, witnesses from other states began to appear. A middle-aged man from Arizona, the brother of one of Claire's former husbands, stood with reddened eyes. He spoke about his brother's sudden death after weeks of fatigue, nausea, confusion. He talked about insurance, about property transfers, about Claire disappearing right after the funeral. A woman from Oregon spoke about her father, who had also married Claire briefly, who also fell ill the same way, and also died, leaving his family stunned. Different stories, the same chilling rhythm. Financial experts presented records. Each marriage was tied to money flows, insurance policies, assets changing hands. They projected numbers, timelines, signatures, and suddenly what Claire had hidden behind her smile appeared like a map. Not love, a target. When the prosecution described the repeating pattern, they didn't use dramatic language. They simply laid everything out in order, and that cold precision sent a shiver through the courtroom. Every time Claire entered the life of a man with assets, months later came illness, then care, then decline, then death or near death, and after that, paperwork. Throughout it all, Claire showed almost no expression. Only when one witness mentioned the exact detail of an unlabeled bottle did she tilt her head and look at me again. The cold smile returned, as if to say that no matter the verdict, she still saw me as the one who ruined her plan. I looked back at her, without challenge, without hatred. Just the look of someone who had decided to keep living and no longer give her the power to control his emotions. On the day the jury deliberated, Jake sat beside me, his hand clenched so tightly it had gone white. He no longer defended Claire. He no longer looked at me like I was the one who had destroyed things. He just stared at the floor, like someone learning how to live inside a new truth. I placed my hand on my son's shoulder, light and brief. Jake nodded slightly as if that was all he could bear. The jury returned sooner than I expected. When the judge asked for the verdict, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The decision was read clearly, without hesitation. Guilty. Claire didn't scream. She only blinked, then gave a thin smile, as if she still wanted to keep the last piece of her arrogance. But when the judge sentenced her to life in prison, that smile disappeared. Not because of remorse, but because her plan had been shut down permanently. As the officers led her away, her eyes slid past Jake. My son recoiled as if someone had thrown cold water on him. I saw that fracture more clearly than any sentence. There is no way to repair a marriage built on lies. Outside the courthouse, the sun was mild. Everything moved on as usual. Traffic, people walking, their conversations. And there I stood, feeling as though I had lost part of my family, while keeping hold of the one thing that mattered most. We were still alive. After the trial, my body felt like it had found its proper rhythm again. No more mornings waking up foggy-headed, no more sudden nausea for no reason, no more feeling my heart slip out of sync just from standing up to pour water. I started walking around the neighborhood again, the same route my wife and I used to take after dinner. The leaves still fell the same way, the wooden fences were still weathered, but I no longer felt like I was walking through a bad dream. The doctor said my numbers were gradually stabilizing, as if my body simply needed time to repair itself once it was no longer being dragged down every day. I didn't tell them everything. I just nodded, thanked them, and left. Some things only make sense if you've lived inside them. Jake was different. My son didn't bounce back the way I did. He sank, slowly and deeply, like someone who had fallen off a bridge he thought was solid. In the early days, he didn't leave his apartment. I stopped by and found the curtains drawn, dishes piled in the sink, and the couch sunken where he had sat for hours without moving. "You don't need to come by," Jake said, his voice hollow. "I'm fine." I didn't argue. I hung the bag of groceries on the doorknob, left the spare key where he always kept it, then sat in the chair across from him, silent. At my age, I know some pain can't stand noise. It only needs someone there, long enough, steady enough. One evening, Jake suddenly let it spill out, like he couldn't hold it in anymore. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he said. "I lived with her. I defended her. I yelled at you." I looked at my son and saw no anger left in his eyes, only shame and emptiness. "You were deceived," I said. "That doesn't make you a bad man." Jake shook his head, gave a short laugh that died immediately. "But I chose wrong." "I chose wrong too," I replied. "The difference is, I lived long enough to fix it." A few days later, he agreed to try therapy. He didn't tell many people, just sent me a short message. "I'll try." I didn't ask questions. I drove him to the clinic on a rainy afternoon and waited in the car with a folded newspaper like an old habit. When Jake came back out, his face was still tense, but his shoulders weren't drawn up as tight. He didn't say much, just, "I'm tired." I nodded and drove him home. Sometimes being tired is a sign of beginning. During those months, I also did what I had intended to do on that fateful dinner night, but without wine, without false smiles, without anyone controlling my breathing. I met with Graham, sat in his quiet office, and placed the new will on his desk. "Are you sure?" Graham asked, looking at me like someone who had just come through a storm. "I'm sure," I said. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. I left a portion for Jake, enough for him to stand on his feet, enough to give him a foundation to rebuild his life. But most of it I put into a social fund, places that help elderly people who are being exploited, families facing financial fraud, people like the man I had been, who need someone to point out the warning signs before it's too late. I wanted my money to do some good, not become bait for another predator. When Graham handed me the pen, I held it firmly and signed with a clean stroke. The moment the ink touched the paper, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Not from revenge, but from having the final decision returned to where it belonged. I was no longer anyone's walking wallet, no longer an asset in someone else's plan. I was myself, and everything was in my hands again. I didn't tell Jake right away. I waited for an evening when he came by on his own, a rare time he left his apartment without me prompting him. He stood in the kitchen, looking out at the backyard, where I had replanted a few of my wife's old flower beds. He asked quietly, "You replanted them?" "Yes," I said. "I wanted this yard to smell alive again." Jake was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry." I looked at my son. He didn't need to say more. I just nodded once, slowly. Some apologies shouldn't be stretched out. They only need to be accepted. I handed him an envelope. Not documents, just a piece of paper with a few lines and a spare key to my house. "You don't have to use it," I said, "but I want you to know I'm not closing the door on you." Jake took it, his fingers trembling slightly. He nodded, eyes red but without tears. In the days that followed, things didn't become perfect. Jake still had mornings when he didn't want to get out of bed. He still sometimes flinched at strangers on the street, like he was afraid of trusting the wrong person again. But he started eating properly, started replying to messages, started talking about work again, even if only a few sentences at a time. As for me, I learned something I used to dismiss. Intuition isn't baseless suspicion. It's a small bell that rings when something doesn't line up. I heard that bell at the dinner about my will, and because of it, I was still here. One afternoon, Jake came by early with 2 cups of coffee. He set one down in front of me the way I used to do for him when he was little. "I think I get it now," he said. "Not everyone who smiles at you wants what's best for you." I looked at my son, feeling the weight in my chest ease. "And not everyone who tells the truth is trying to hurt you," I replied. Jake exhaled and nodded. He looked around the house, the place that had nearly become the scene of a natural death, then said softly, as if to himself, "At least, we're still here." I didn't answer right away. I just lifted my coffee cup and tapped it lightly against his. "Yes," I said, "and from now on, no one gets to take advantage of that." The following spring arrived gently, as if the city itself knew how to move softly after a storm. The flowers I had replanted in the backyard began to bud, and Jake slowly started having brighter days. He kept up with therapy, but his eyes no longer looked lost. He began answering his phone more quickly, started asking if I needed anything from the store, started staying for dinner and washing dishes the way he used to when he was a boy I made help out. I didn't rush to ask about his love life. After everything that had happened, I knew even mentioning it could make him pull back. But one evening, while I was chopping salad in the kitchen, Jake stood in the doorway holding a paper bag of groceries, his voice hesitant. "Dad, could I bring someone over for dinner this week?" I paused for a beat. The knife rested on the cutting board. For a moment, the image of Claire and that ill-timed smile flickered in my mind. But I didn't let the memory decide my answer. "That's fine," I said calmly. "What's her name?" "Lisa," Jake replied. "She works at the community library. I met her when I went to return some books. I just want you to meet her, not to judge. I want you to know." I looked at my son. There was something in his voice that put me at ease. He wasn't impulsive. He was careful, like someone who had learned to put his foot on solid ground before stepping forward. "Bring her over," I said. "I'll make the stew you like." That evening, I set the table neatly. Nothing fancy, just a light tablecloth, a few small candles, and a simple vase of flowers. I wanted it to feel like a normal dinner, not a test, but I also reminded myself to observe carefully, the way I had done my entire working life. Lisa arrived on time, wearing a beige coat, her hair tied neatly at the back of her neck, carrying a warm apple pie. She stepped into the house with a measured smile, not trying to impress. She greeted me by looking straight at me, without avoiding my eyes, her voice clear. "Hello, Mr. Holloway. Thank you for having me." No forced familiarity, no excessive ease. I noticed her hands as she offered the pie. Slightly cold from the weather, steady, unhurried. She looked around the house, but not like someone assessing value. She looked like someone stepping into a place with history and respecting it. During dinner, Lisa talked about her work at the library, about older people who come to borrow books and stay to read the newspaper, about children who come for weekend story hour. She laughed as she mentioned one particular boy who insisted on hearing the same story 5 times in a row. I watched Jake while she spoke. His face softened, not because he was dazzled, but because he felt safe. I asked a few questions, not to pry, but to hear how she answered. Lisa didn't try to sound knowledgeable. When she didn't know something, she said she didn't know. When she had an opinion, she stated it clearly, but didn't push others to agree. She didn't bring up money. She didn't ask about my former work, my house, or the kinds of things calculating people often open with under the guise of concern. After dinner, Jake went out to the backyard with me to straighten a few chairs. Lisa stayed in the kitchen washing dishes, even though I told her I would do it. I could hear the water running and the soft clink of plates, steady and unhurried. Not performative, just habit. Jake stood beside me, looking down at the flower beds. "I was afraid you wouldn't like her." I looked at my son, then through the kitchen door, where Lisa was drying a plate, her movements slow and careful. "I don't dislike her," I said. Jake let out a breath, as if a weight had finally lifted from his chest. "I don't want you to go through anything like that again." I turned to look at Jake. Sometimes being a father isn't about saying the most correct thing. It's about saying what your son needs in order to stand up straight. I put my hand on his shoulder and said the words I had held inside for far too long. "This time, I trust you." Jake looked at me, his eyes damp. He didn't say, "Thank you." He just nodded, but that nod carried the weight of a promise. In the months that followed, Lisa came by my house a few times. Each time I still observed, but my vigilance slowly shifted into something else. Reassurance. She didn't insert herself into my relationship with Jake. She didn't act possessive. She simply stood nearby, stepping back when needed. When Jake panicked because of a sudden memory, she didn't blame him or rush him. She just said, "I'm here." That was all. One late summer evening, Jake spoke to me in the living room where the warm light fell across my wife's photo on the cabinet. "I want to marry her," Jake said quietly. "But I don't want a big wedding. I want it simple. I want everything to be clear." "Clear is good," I replied. "No secrets." Jake nodded. No secrets. The wedding took place in my backyard, under the old oak tree my wife used to hang lights on during Christmas. Just a few close friends, a handful of relatives Jake still kept in touch with, and some of Lisa's co-workers. There was no stage, no long speeches. Just a gentle sunny afternoon, soft music, and vows spoken with nothing hidden behind them. As Jake held Lisa's hand, I stood behind them, watching my son like someone who had walked through fire and still knew how to love. I suddenly saw my wife in my memory, the way she smiled when Jake was little and ran circles around the yard, the way she used to say, "He'll be okay," whenever I worried too much. I lifted my eyes to the pale blue sky, feeling as though she was somewhere out there, looking down and nodding. After the ceremony, Lisa came over and handed me a glass of lemonade. She didn't use flowery words. She said just enough. "Mr. Holloway, I'll take care of Jake with kindness. I won't promise perfection, but I promise honesty." I looked at her and nodded once. That's enough. When night fell and the guests had gone home, I stood alone in the yard, looking at the string lights and the empty chairs. I could clearly see that I was getting older, my back not as straight as before, my hands marked with a few more age spots. But in my mind, everything felt brighter. Evil had knocked on my door and nearly stepped inside. But it didn't win. It was stopped by a bit of intuition, a bit of resilience, and by the truth finally being spoken. I heard Jake laughing inside the house, a laugh without strain. I turned to look through the glass door and saw my son holding his new wife, with no shadow of fear in his eyes. My family had been saved, not in a perfect way, but in the truest way, and for me, that was a victory complete enough to let me sleep in peace. Now, my mornings begin with sunlight through the window and the familiar smell of coffee. I still walk around the old neighborhood, still greet the neighbors who once checked on me during the months when I looked my weakest. My health has returned to its proper rhythm, not a brief surge of energy, but a steady balance. I sleep more deeply, eat better, and most importantly, my mind is no longer foggy. My body reminds me that it has been freed from something that never belonged in it. Looking back, I understand that what saved my life wasn't strength or luck. It was clarity at the right moment. It was the moment I stopped and asked why, instead of swallowing everything just to keep the peace. I didn't win through hatred. I won by staying calm, keeping records, asking the right people, and patiently waiting for the truth to surface. Clarity isn't loud, but it lasts. I share this story not to spread fear. The story in this video is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences, created to offer moral value, life lessons, and emotional insight for viewers. It does not encourage anyone to imitate dangerous actions, does not incite harm, and does not target any individual or organization. What I hope is that you take away something useful for yourself. I believe intuition is a small bell worth listening to. Keeping control of your finances is keeping control of your life. Don't be afraid to ask questions when something doesn't add up, even if those questions make the atmosphere uncomfortable. And if you feel uncertain, seek help the right way, from a doctor, a lawyer, a professional, or someone you trust. Don't stay silent just to preserve surface harmony. Real harmony doesn't exist on a foundation of concealment. My family didn't return to what it once was, but we learned how to be together in a healthier way. Jake smiles more. Lisa brings calm. I am getting older, yes, but I am more clear-minded. And in that clarity, I have found peace. If this story made you think, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. If you found it helpful, share the video so more people can stay alert and know they are not alone in asking questions. Thank you for staying until the very end and listening to my story.